It is 6 a.m. and you are awake, but you have not moved. The ceiling has not changed. Your body feels heavier than it should. You are not sick. You are not lazy. You are running a system that was never designed for you to win. You check your phone before your feet hit the floor. Not because you want to, because the architecture of your environment has trained you to. You see the number in your bank account. You feel the low-grade nausea of a person doing their best inside a broken operating system. This is not a character flaw. The frustration you carry quietly, the private shame of feeling behind, of watching other people's timelines while yours stalls, that is not evidence of your failure. That is the predictable output of a cognitive and financial environment built for someone else's trajectory. You are not broken. You are poorly architected. And architecture can be rebuilt. That is not a motivational phrase. That is a mechanical fact. SPE. What you are about to receive is not a list of tips. It is a structural demolition and reconstruction of the hours before 8 a.m. The hours that statistically determine the quality of every hour that follows. These are not hacks. They are load-bearing habits. And the difference will compound in ways your current self cannot fully calculate. Here is the advice you have already been given. Wake up at 4:45 a.m. Cold shower. Meditate for 20 minutes. Journal 3 pages. Run 5 miles. Then read a self-improvement book while drinking celery juice. If you are not doing all of that, you are failing. That advice has produced more abandoned alarm clocks and more private shame than any other piece of guidance in the history of the self-improvement industry. The problem is not your willpower. Willpower is a finite neurological resource. It depletes with every decision. Stacking 6 extreme behaviors into a pre-dawn sequence and calling it a morning routine is not discipline. It is a design error. You are burning your most limited executive resource before the workday starts, then wondering why you default to reactive patterns by 10 a.m. What successful people actually do before 8 a.m. is not extreme. It is not cinematic. It is not Instagrammable. It is a sequence of small, deliberate, compounding behaviors that protect their cognitive bandwidth, regulate their neurological baseline, and install intentionality before the external world begins competing for their attention. That is the system. 7 behaviors, applied consistently, not perfectly. Speak 1. Own your first 7 minutes. Not your first hour, 7 minutes. The moment your alarm sounds, your limbic system is primed for the path of least resistance. That path leads directly to your phone. Within 60 seconds of waking, the average American adult has opened a social application and begun consuming content algorithmically engineered to overstimulate the dopamine system before the prefrontal cortex is fully online. The trap is assuming this is harmless because it is familiar. It is not harmless. You are seeding your reticular activating system with noise, comparison, and reactivity before you have set a single intentional parameter for the day. The first 7 minutes are not downtime. They are the initial conditions of your operating system. Own that window, and you have seized the neurological leverage point that governs everything downstream. Surrendering it costs you more than a morning. It costs you the compound trajectory of a year. 2. Hydrate before you caffeinate. This is not wellness theater. After 6 to 8 hours of metabolic activity during sleep, your cortisol levels peak naturally at approximately 8 a.m. Your body's biological alertness mechanism. Consuming caffeine during peak cortisol production does not amplify the effect. It overrides it. You develop tolerance faster. You require more caffeine to achieve the same output. Your natural energy architecture degrades. The trap is using coffee as a replacement for sleep debt and dehydration rather than a precision tool. 16 ounces of water, consumed before caffeine, rehydrates your neural tissue. initiates metabolic activation, and preserves your caffeine sensitivity. You are not delaying your coffee. You are making it work the way it is supposed to. Your afternoon energy crash becomes structural rather than biochemical. You are no longer fighting your own physiology. 3. Define one primary output the night before, or in the first 5 minutes after waking. Not a task list, not a to-do inventory. One output. The single most important thing that, if completed today, makes every other task secondary. Write it down. Not in an app. On paper. The act of writing in longhand activates a distinct neurological encoding process that digital input does not replicate. Speak. The trap is beginning the day reactive. Opening email, checking messages, absorbing other people's priorities before installing your own. The majority of knowledge workers spend the first 90 minutes of their workday processing inputs generated by other people's agendas. By the time they turn to their own highest value output, their cognitive bandwidth is already depleted. One written primary output functions as a filter. This is executive control installed at the structural level. 4. 10 minutes of deliberate movement before screens. Not a workout, not a performance. 10 minutes of intentional physical activation. Body weight movement, a walk, a slow stretch sequence. The mechanism here is not cardiovascular. It is neurochemical. Physical movement triggers a measurable increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that enhances neural connectivity and cognitive plasticity for 2 to 3 hours post-exercise. The trap is skipping this step on the days it feels most necessary. The depleted mornings, the heavy mornings, the mornings when your body feels like it is already lost. Those are precisely the mornings when 10 minutes of movement produces the highest neurological return. You are not exercising for your body's appearance. You are calibrating your brain's chemical environment. The concrete benefit, measurable reduction in reactive decision-making, impulsive spending, and anxiety-driven procrastination throughout the following hours. 5. 5 minutes of structured silence and one written question. Not meditation in the traditional sense. Not a spiritual practice. A deliberate pause, phone in another room, no audio input, during which you write one question on paper. Not a goal, not an affirmation. A question. Something like, what would I do today if I knew it would compound for 5 years? The trap is confusing silence with emptiness and filling it with content. Podcasts during breakfast, television during coffee, music during the commute. These inputs are consuming the cognitive bandwidth your prefrontal cortex uses for generative thinking, the kind of thinking that produces solutions, strategy, and intentional direction. A written question primes your reticular activating system to filter incoming experience for relevant information throughout the day. The benefit compounds over weeks, not hours. 6. Consume construction, not entertainment, during your first absorptive window. Not inspiration for its own sake. Not distraction branded as education. A specific page of a specific book related to a specific skill you are actively building. A single long-form article from a credible source relevant to your financial or professional trajectory. The trap is consuming motivational content as a substitute for structural action. The dopamine response generated by a 4-minute motivational clip is chemically identical to the dopamine response of watching a comedy reel. Your brain cannot distinguish between being entertained about productivity and being productive. 1 page a day is 365 pages a year. Approximately 5 to 7 books of domain-specific knowledge, installed without a single dramatic gesture. Velocity does not require intensity. It requires consistency and direction. 7. 90 seconds of financial intentionality. Not a full budget review, not an anxiety spiral over numbers. 90 seconds. Open your banking app with the same clinical detachment you would bring to reading a weather forecast. Note the number. Note the direction, up or down from yesterday. Write one word in your planner: stable, declining, or building. That is the entire behavior. The trap is avoiding financial data because it generates cortisol. Avoidance does not reduce the cortisol response. It amplifies it, because your nervous system registers unmonitored threats as more dangerous than monitored ones. 90 seconds of daily financial contact desensitizes the threat response. Over 30 days, your relationship with your financial reality shifts, from avoidance and shame to clinical awareness and structural control. Now, here is what no one tells you about systems that actually work. They stop feeling meaningful around day 14. The excitement fades. The novelty is gone. The behaviors feel mechanical and unremarkable. Your body has not yet adapted enough to deliver the biochemical rewards of consistent discipline. Your finances have not yet shifted enough to validate the 90-second morning ritual. This is the valley of silence. This is where the vast majority of people stop. Not because they are weak, because nothing in their environment is reinforcing the behavior. The old operating system begins to whisper. You skipped yesterday and nothing collapsed. One morning without the routine is not failure. 2 mornings is a pattern. A pattern becomes a default. And defaults become the architecture you live inside for years. Prepare for this, not after it arrives. Right now. Know that between day 14 and day 28, your discipline will feel like irrelevance. Decide in advance that this is not a signal to stop. It is the signal that the system is taking root below the surface of what you can currently see. The lag time is not emptiness. It is the underground phase of compound growth. Invisible, structural, and loading. There is a second disruption you need to prepare for: social friction. When you stop being available for 10 p.m. conversations because you have installed a sleep boundary. When you start declining weekend expenses because you have a 90-day financial target. The people around you will not always celebrate this. Some will mock it. Some will call it extreme. Some will push back because your discipline is an indirect indictment of their own defaults. Do not let their resistance recalibrate your trajectory. This is not arrogance. This is structural self-preservation. The people who benefit most from your discipline are the ones who will depend on the version of you that emerges from it. Your family, your future colleagues, the relationships you have not yet built. You do not owe the old version of your life an apology for being rebuilt. Here is where I want you to pause and do something specific. Place yourself 3 years from today, not in a fantasy, in a logical extrapolation of what these 7 behaviors, compounded daily for 36 months, actually produce. Your body has adapted. Your cognitive baseline is elevated and consistent. You are not depleted by 2 p.m. You do not feel the low-grade nausea of financial disorder because you have moved the numbers. Your mornings are not dramatic. They are not photogenic. They are yours. You wake before most people around you, not because you are performing discipline, but because your system has installed itself so thoroughly that it no longer requires willpower. You have crossed the threshold from effortful behavior to structural default. That threshold is the most important line you will ever cross. It is located somewhere between day 45 and day 90 of consistent execution. The respect you have been waiting for, from your employer, from your peers, from yourself, is not going to arrive as a single event. It is going to accumulate silently, the way compound interest accumulates, below the surface until the day it is unmistakably visible. The person who executes these 7 behaviors for 90 days does not recognize themselves in the mirror, not because they look different, because they think differently. Even if you only execute 4 of these 7 behaviors consistently, your trajectory will change. Not because 4 is enough, because 4 is compounding, and compounding behaviors produce nonlinear results. The system does not require perfection, it requires directional consistency. Miss a morning, miss a week, come back. The architecture does not collapse because you were human. It waits. This is not hustle. It is not willpower. It is not a motivational state you must sustain. It is architecture. You are installing a new operating system into the hours that were previously governed by default, by dopamine, by the path of least resistance. Once an operating system is installed and running, it does not require daily inspiration to function. It runs, it compounds, it builds. The gap between the person you are right now and the person you are describing when you imagine your best possible life is not a motivation gap. It is not a talent gap. It is a structural gap. And structural gaps are closed with deliberate architecture applied over sufficient time. You already have the time. You are spending it somewhere. The only question is whether you are spending it on your default operating system or on the one you are choosing to install. You have the complete blueprint. 7 behaviors, no extreme routines, no dramatic gestures, no identity performance. Phone down for 7 minutes. Water before caffeine. 1 written output. 10 minutes of movement. 5 minutes of silence and 1 question. Construction over entertainment. 90 seconds of financial contact. That is the architecture of a rebuilt morning. That is the sequence that separates the people who feel behind from the people who do not. Right now, in this moment, before you close this video, do one thing. Comment the words, "I am rebuilding." Not for the algorithm, not for me. As a declaration to the version of yourself that is already 3 years ahead, waiting for you to make the structural decision that closes the distance. Subscribe so that the next piece of this architecture reaches you when it is built. This is not the end of a video. This is day 1 of the rebuild.